Dr. Bull later told Jones that Bowers, while in shock, was sweating like a coronary. Says Bull, I made mention to Jones that Bowers was sweating a lot. He was wringing wet when he came in, and I wondered, because of this, whether he had had a coronary. The man was in a state of severe shock, the kind of shock you could expect from the type of accident he was in. He was dying. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Nell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. We are in part 2 of our walkthrough of the eyewitness testimony of Lee Bowers. He was a railroad supervisor in the railroad tower behind the Grassy Knoll. The things he observed were fascinating. If you missed part 1, you'll want to go back and see it because we read through his Warren Commission testimony. We looked at the statement he made to Mark Lane. We talked briefly about his seeming mysterious death. We read through an article, part of it called Disappearing Witnesses, about Lee Bowers' death and his widow's statement, which said that they told him not to talk. Very fascinating. We read through a portion of High Treason as well. Today, we are going to be reading from this book. I found it in my local library, which we have resources here in Dallas of, smaller books that are published. I mean, this one's very thin. It's all about the Lee Bowers story, and it is called JFK Assassination, Eyewitness, Rush to Conspiracy, which of course is a play on the words rush to judgment. This is Anita Dickinson. She is a retired advanced accident investigator with a total of 27 years of law enforcement experience, including 22 years with the Dallas Police Department. So make of that what you will. Do you think that she somehow had an agenda in writing this? Well, perhaps she did, but what we're going to do is look at her book and see, is she coming at this from an anti-conspiracy mindset? What motivated the writing of the book? But also, what does she observe? Given her experience, we should listen to her voice and consider what she knows and what she thinks and what she found. It's very fascinating. So let's go ahead and get into the book. Now, she sets up what we basically did in episode 1, which is that he was a witness, a key eyewitness to the JFK assassination, and less than 3 years later was killed in a mysterious one-car accident under mysterious circumstances. His name was added to a list of individuals associated with the investigation of the Kennedy assassination who had allegedly died under suspicious circumstances. A few months before his death, Mark Lane had interviewed Bowers for his book, Rush to Judgment. Bowers' statements in that Mark Lane interview, plus the conflicting information regarding the accident, added fuel to the conspiracy theories. So let's go ahead. I'm actually going to stop and grab my copy of Rush to Judgment, and we'll read the relevant sections before we get into Anita Dickinson's book. So here is Rush to Judgment by Mark Lane, and I just wanted to share with you this great map. In it, you can see the triple underpass location, you can see Elm Street and the book depository, and you can see the location of the railroad tower where Lee Bowers was. So very useful. And what you need to know about Lee Bowers in this book is that he shows up in the very beginning of the book. He is mentioned in the prologue, connected to, like we read last time, the testimony of Miss Mercer. Miss Julia Ann Mercer observed 2 men going up the Grassy Knoll. One was parked at the edge, one was going up with a rifle case the morning of the assassination. One of the men was wearing plaid shirt, which lines up precisely with what Lee Bowers observed. We get part of his testimony in this book, the things that we read through in our last account, so I'm not going to reread those, but feel free to go back to part 1 to refresh your memory, or if you didn't catch it, you'll want to go back and do that because we read through precisely his words so that you can get an accounting of that. But he walks through that testimony. He describes the things, including the ways that they dovetail with Julia Ann Mercer's observations. And then he goes to this point in the commission testimony where commission counsel is being told by Bowers that something occurred in this particular spot which was out of the ordinary, which attracted my eye for some reason, which I could not identify. You couldn't describe it? Nothing that I could pinpoint as having happened that, and before Bowers could conclude this most important sentence, the commission lawyer interrupted with an unrelated question. A little later, Bowers was excused as a witness, leaving unexplained what it was in the area that caught his attention. In a subsequent interview with me, which was filmed and tape recorded, however, Bowers offered more detailed information on this important point, and here is their exchange. Bowers: at the time of the shooting, in the vicinity where the two men I have described were, there was a flash of light, or, as far as I'm concerned, something I could not identify, but there was something which occurred which caught my eye in this immediate area on the embankment. Now, what this was, I could not state at that time, and at this time I could not identify it, other than there was some unusual occurrence, a flash of light or smoke or something which caused me to feel like something out of the ordinary had occurred there. In reading your testimony, Mr. Bowers, it appears that just as you were about to make that statement, you were interrupted in the middle of the sentence by the commission counsel, who then went into another area. Well, that's correct. I was simply trying to answer his question, and he seemed to be satisfied with the answer to that one and did not care for me to elaborate. There's a few more mentions of, because what Lane is doing in this book is kind of interlacing the various testimonies rather than giving one and then the other and then the other. He is interlacing them where they fit together so that the reader can make their own determination about what happens. It says, except for Lee Bowers, who surveyed the scene from a tower behind the wooden fence, the witnesses with the best view of the fenced-in area were those standing above Elm Street on the railroad overpass. And so then it talks about those eyewitnesses as well. I think that is the end of the sections that deal with Lee Bowers' perspective. He does go into the part afterward where Lee Bowers testified that at least 50 law enforcement officers were engaged in searching. So he points that out, but that's the end of the rush to judgment look at Lee Bowers. So now we're going to go back to this book from Anita Dickinson. She says, so she talks about the accident, and she says, as a retired advanced accident investigator, I conduct cold case accident investigations. I had not heard of the Lee Bowers case until I was contacted by Indigo Films regarding a new series, America Declassified. An episode on JFK was going to include the Bowers accident, and I was asked to participate in the episode. I had only a short time for research prior to the taping of the show. The details I was able to identify left me with more questions than answers. What were the real facts behind the Bowers accident? Finding the answers meant attempting the reconstruction of a 1996 accident. I remind you, she's published this in 2013. So we're talking about a difference of almost 50 years. A full cold case accident investigation would certainly push the limits on identifying any pertinent details of the accident. So her accident investigation is quite difficult. She says she's uniquely qualified to conduct these accident investigations because she has 27 years of law enforcement experience with 22 years with the Dallas PD. She's familiar with the accident investigation process as well as the Texas Accident Report System and Texas traffic laws. So that's why she's writing this book. She gives us a look at Lee Bowers' life. If you are interested in the Lee Bowers case, you may wish to purchase this. The name of it is JFK Assassination Eyewitness, Rush to Conspiracy by Anita Dickinson. So if you are interested in reading more, which I would encourage you to do, these are the books that we're looking at is Rush to Judgment, Anita Dickinson. We have High Treason by Robert Groden and Harrison Livingston. And then next time we'll be looking at Hit List. So these are the books that I'm pulling from for this look at Lee Bowers' life. But she goes into an assessment of his history, which is valuable. But then she says he arrived at work that day, clocked in, and started his shift. He was about to become one of the key eyewitnesses. Bowers had a front seat up close and center stage to the events as they unfolded. She gives an aerial shot, which is a helpful look. You can see Dealey Plaza there and where the president came down. And here is the Grassy Knoll area. There is the railroad tower where he was observing. So that is helpful to know. If you are not familiar with the area, the other thing that you want to know about this area is that this is an incline. It is lower right below the bridge and it's higher up here. So as the cars come, he was able to see this corner, he testified. Then it passed out of view, then it came back into his view, and he saw some of the shots on the way down. So that was his testimony there. She goes into an accounting of his Warren Commission testimony, his Dallas affidavit, and then his comments to Mark Lane. And she does a great analysis of the level of detail that's different between that initial affidavit and then what was shared in the Warren Commission, and then the additional information that was given to Mark Lane. And she says a few months after that interview with Mark Lane, Bowers was dead. The conspiracy theories started to build. She says he was traveling alone in a 1965 Pontiac Catalina convertible and hit a bridge located on Highway 67, 2 miles southwest of Midlothian, Texas. He was transported to the Waxahachie Hospital by ambulance and then transferred to Methodist Hospital in Dallas. Judge W.E. Richburg, Justice of the Peace in Dallas County, pronounced death at 12:50 p.m. After Bowers' death, reports began to surface that he had received death threats as a result of the Warren Commission testimony and his statements in the Mark Lane interview. There were claims that his death was not accidental and his death was due to what he saw the day President Kennedy was shot and killed. And she says his name was added to this list of suspicious deaths. 2 authors were cited in the report, Penn Jones and then Richard Lewis, who published a book called The Scavengers and Critics of the Warren Report, which I have not read. We did read that selection from Penn Jones, Forgive My Grief 2, last time, so that's in part 1 if you're interested in hearing those particulars. Those were the places that chronicled his death. She gives a little look at these 2 men. Penn Jones owned the Midlothian Mirror. Interestingly, Richard Lewis is the other person, and it says, Richard Lewis, the Scavengers and Critics of the Warren Report. Remember what we talked about, that Dr. Bohl had actually lived in the same town. He had served in the same town as Penn Jones, but it's Richard Lewis whose account is shared. It says he interviewed Dr. Roy Bohl in 1967. Dr. Bohl was the attending physician when Bowers arrived at the Waxahachie Hospital. Dr. Bohl refuted Penn Jones's allegations that Bowers was in a strange state of shock. So Richard Lewis says that that was refuted. The commission determined based upon that Lewis document that there was no merit to any further investigation of the Bowers accident by the committee. So that is fascinating. I didn't realize that there had been that discrepancy. Did you know that? She points out Lewis and Penn Jones differed in their accounts of Mr. Bowers' death. Jones maintains in volume 2 of Forgive My Grief that Bowers was killed in an unusual 1-car accident. Jones further states that the injured man was in some sort of strange shock. Lewis interviewed Dr. Bohl, the doctor who rode in the ambulance with Bowers. Dr. Bohl later told Jones that Bowers, while in shock, was sweating like a coronary. Says Bohl, I made mention to Jones that Bowers was sweating a lot. He was wringing wet when he came in, and I wondered, because of this, whether he had had a coronary. The man was in a state of severe shock, the kind of shock you could expect from the type of accident he was in. He was dying. So then this gives the chronicling of her investigation from that point. She basically lays out different legal ramifications. Again, if you're interested in the particular accident details, you're going to want to get this book because she goes into the legal framework for why decisions were made, how the accident reports were made, and that sort of thing. She talks about another fatality that occurred at the same time, 2 different vehicles with similar features that were both printed in the Midlothian paper. She says, yet there is a glaring difference in the details of the 2 reports published in the Midlothian Mirror. The newspaper was a weekly paper and was published on Thursday. Bowers' accident occurred on Tuesday. There was sufficient time to have obtained similar information regarding Bowers' accident. She points out that there were 2 accidents that week that were given information about, and that one was given more information than this Lee Bowers accident, and that she finds it suspicious because there was time for Penn Jones to have discovered more information, that it was published on Thursday, that the accident occurred on Tuesday, and that both could have been reported on similarly, and yet the other accident was given more detail. She notes, she says, I found Jones's omission and apparent lack of any valid journalistic investigation regarding the Bowers accident to be quite revealing, and did become a consideration in my analysis of his conspiracy theories. So she's being honest and saying, look, it seems like there was more information given about this other accident than the one that was Lee Bowers. Later, his book addresses it, but his own paper gave less information about it. So she finds that to lack journalistic integrity. The next thing she does is try to locate the accident site. And honestly, this is the part that's the most interesting to me because I grew up in Midlothian. So she tries to go through, she looks at the accident description and the kind of roads that existed at the time. She recognizes that she's investigating, nearly 50 years after the accident, and that even the site of the accident could have been changed by the point that she's investigating. But she kind of happens upon, she basically identifies, I believe, like 5 or 6 different sites that could be possible. And then she starts to narrow it down based on the descriptions that were given. There was the description in the newspaper. There was the description also of the eyewitness, who was a farmer. And as she looked into the details, she discovers that one of the property records show that that man, the farmer mowing the fields next to the bridge, did have property that he owned that was right next to one of the sites that she had identified. And that to me sounds really credible and makes sense, and it's good investigative work. And she says, I cannot state with absolute certainty the bridge located northeast of Ward Road on the East Service Road is the actual accident site. I can state, however, it does have an extremely high probability as the right location based on the information contained in the death certificate and the relationship of the Edwards property. The bridge as it exists today is the same bridge that was there in 1966. This is extremely important as the construction of the bridge would provide an evaluation of the potential vehicle damage and injuries that would result from a collision that would have occurred in 1966. This bridge represents a piece of physical evidence that still exists 47 years later. And she provides some photos of that site. She describes the site very well, and she gives a close-up look at some of the concrete structures that may have been part of what was hit. She says that these are very solid concrete blocks sunk deep into the ground. So I just want to express admiration and interest in the way that she went about identifying the site. I think that's pretty cool. She does describe the injuries that were suffered, and that the son stated that his father had massive head injuries. The man at the funeral home also confirmed that he had severe head injuries. She talks about the dynamics of the accident and what would have happened, and she starts to lean clearly toward the idea that it was accidental death. She says that the Pat Martin Funeral Home in Midlothian owned the ambulance that first transported Bowers to the hospital in Waxahachie. Dr. Bull met the ambulance at the Waxahachie Hospital. Dr. Bull was interviewed by Richard Lewis and David Perry, and those two interviews were 25 years apart. In both interviews, Dr. Bull refuted the claim Bowers was in a strange state of shock. He indicated that the shock was not unusual considering his injuries. Now, I have to say, this holds great weight with me. Again, this was my childhood doctor. I think I said that in the part one. If I haven't said it in this one, now you know. Dr. Bull was actually my childhood physician. He was the person who we went for annual checkups to. He treated every case of poison ivy I ever got. I didn't actually have a very sick childhood, but I did get a heap of poison ivy. So this man, I owe a lot of comfort to Dr. Bull, because that was always the bane of my existence every summer. But that Dr. Bull was quoted in one place as having said that there was this strange state of shock, but that in two interviews 25 years apart, he completely denied that and said instead that he was sweating, was excessively wet, and that he suspected a coronary. Is significant. Now, to me, that is a different question than whether or not there was anything nefarious happening. But it does help me know what Dr. Bull's assessment of Lee Bowers was, which was it looked like he could have been having a heart attack. Again, that does not actually mean that there was nothing nefarious going on. We have been told by the CIA that they have all sorts of weaponry, that all sorts of experiments were done under the MK Ultra program and under other black ops operations to try to assassinate foreign leaders, to try to find unique ways of assassinating foreign leaders. They absolutely were looking at, can we cause fast-growing cancer? Can we evoke or incite a heart attack? And to think that those things couldn't then also be turned on American citizens would be naive. So again, the question of whether Lee Bowers was actually having a heart attack or had some other thing that instigated the accident is not the same as saying the accident was completely an accident, that it was 100% just unintentional and a freak of medical situation. So could be, could not be. My real point here is that Dr. Bull seems to give clear indication in contrast with what Penn Jones initially reported. Now, then you have to ask, well, was he threatened? We don't know, but 25 years later, he gave the same account, which does strengthen the potential for that. Let me know what you think in the comments. She says that the location of the accident site also helped her make her determination as she saw the bridge abutment and the big concrete blocks. She said the angle at which they were constructed changes the dynamics of the collision, the direction of force, and the point of impact. She said it's consistent with a head-on collision to the concrete bridge abutments and supports the statements that were attributed to Roy Edwards. Bowers had a crushed chest, multiple head and internal injuries, 2 broken legs, and a broken arm. These injuries would be consistent with a high-speed head-on collision that resulted in the engine being driven back into the driver compartment. He was probably not wearing his seatbelt, even though the vehicle would have been equipped with a lap seatbelt. In 1966, there was no law requiring the driver to use the seatbelt while driving, and seatbelts were not commonly used. So she goes through and reconstructs the accident. She talks about conspiracy theories. She talks about Penn Jones. She determines that labeling this accident as an unusual one-car accident is without merit. In her assessment, Bowers lost control of the vehicle, veered off the roadway, and hit a bridge. That the profile of the accident is a classic case of a run off-road scenario and cannot be considered as unusual. That is her final assessment. She says she did identify an interesting pattern in the timeline, and she actually thinks that the allegation that Bowers had talked to ambulance personnel and the claim that he had been drugged surfaced around the same time period. She talks about a Geraldo Rivera documentary in 1992 called Now It Can Be Told, The Curse of JFK. and that the documentary highlighted Lee Bower's role as an eyewitness. She says there's a number of problems with the film, and she indicates that this was all just kind of conspiracy mongering and that there was not credibility to the claims that were presented there. So that is her assessment. That ends the parts of this book that I wanted to highlight for you guys. But I want to hear from you. What do you make of Anita Dickinson's perspective? I really appreciate that she went in depth looking for the location of the accident. I think that's a really valuable contribution to the case. I feel very thankful for someone who would go to that degree to try to discover truth, because that's the mission that we all are on with this case, is what really happened. And for her to identify those big concrete bridge abutments is really a gift to the study of the investigation. She says that would have pushed the front of the vehicle, which she has photographed here. She says it would have gone into the engine compartment, and that would have contributed to his injuries. Now, then we get to the case of who do you believe? We have Dr. Bull potentially giving an initial statement to Penn Jones that's later refuted in 2 different articles. I tend to think, I love going with a first statement, but 2 25-year apart interviews contradicting it does hold some weight with me. Of course, like I said, he's my childhood doctor. I lean into trust with him particularly. But then we have Lee Bowers' widow saying they told him not to talk. That initially she said there was nothing, and then she said they told him not to talk. Well, in part 3, we are going to hopefully rectify these different accounts and look at what is reasonable. Is there any more information that we don't know, which is an important question, because there is some new information in this book that I had never heard or read anywhere else. So come back for that, and we will discuss the final wrap up of the Lee Bowers story together as told in Richard Belzer and David Wayne's Hit List. So come back for that, and let me hear your thoughts in the comments now. Can't wait to read them. Have a great day.